Campus protests over the war in Gaza have become a political and cultural flashpoint this spring. With commencements drawing near, campuses have cracked down on student encampments across the country. School responses to student calls for disinvestment from Israeli interests and disclosure of those university connections has ranged from clearing public ways in Boston under public access rationales to shutting Harvard campuses to the public while trying to get student protesters to clear the yard, to forceful police action at Columbia University, to trying for de-escalation and negotiation with students at schools like Northwestern and Wesleyan. I'm Jennifer Smith, and this is the Codcast, CommonWealth Beacon's podcast about policy and civic life here in Massachusetts. The campus encampments have polarized Massachusetts elected leaders, with divisions in Boston over using police powers to broom Emerson students from a public alley, suggestions that the National Guard be brought in to deal with entrenched encampments, and even claims by U.S. Rep. Jake Auchincloss that the Harvard encampment creates such a disruptive and hostile environment for Jewish and Israeli students that the protests should be shut down on civil rights grounds. But security concerns have been the main clarion call for cities and campuses. So where are we at the uneasy intersection between protected speech, normal protests, public safety, and police action? This week, I'm talking with Juliette Kayyem, former Assistant Secretary at the Department of Homeland Security and professor at Harvard's Kennedy School. Juliette, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So, students have been protesting Israel's actions in Gaza since last fall, but encampments over the past week and change have thrust the protests into national awareness. You, of course, have been following and analyzing the reaction to both Hamas's terror attack on October 7th, in which 1,139 people were killed in Israel, dozens still held hostage, and then Israel's aggressive and widespread military response in Gaza, which has now killed more than 30,000 people, according to Gaza's health ministry, the vast majority of which are children, and the northern parts of Gaza are buckling under famine. Is it fair to say that we are dealing with what is now broadly agreed to be a region-wide war crime and international law violations situation?
So that's difficult, and I'm sort of careful with words or placement. One is because the legal definition of genocide or even a war crime is one in which I will defer to jurists and the legal community in this. It's been a challenge about what to call this. I appreciate your "and" in the beginning and the introduction. I think it's been one of the challenges is that one can both recognize the horror of the Hamas terror attack in October and recognize that Israel's reaction is far from a counterterrorism action. I've been in this world a long time, and it's challenging in terms of even how we describe it. I've sort of resorted to the word slaughter. I mean, honestly, I don't know what else to call it. That's not a legal definition. It's just a descriptive one that basically Israel's counter campaign, especially if you look at the fact that Hamas still seems to be a relevant military player, at least by all outside assessments, is overbroad and not focused on solely Hamas terrorists. And I think the numbers are proving it. So what you're seeing out on the streets here in the United States is a reaction to our support of that activity, which ultimately, as you said, is leading to famine as well.
You're a national security expert, but also both a Harvard Kennedy School professor and mother of college-age children. So when did you first start watching the student protest angle, and what were your first thoughts? Were you thinking, oh, this is going to turn into something quite dramatic, or were you thinking students protest during times of political strife?
So nothing about this is normal. People who have spent years demanding free speech on campuses seem to not want it anymore if it's pro-Palestinians. And I have been dismayed and have certainly said so about the anti-Semitism that is part of, not a major part. I don't believe it's what's animating the students, but certainly it's more than anecdotal, the extent to which some of this stuff has been infiltrated by just pure anti-Semitism. And I don't throw that word around lightly. I mean, it is. But putting those extremes aside, one could have predicted this. And I sometimes feel like I don't want my Twitter feed to be like, told you so. But I think about 6 weeks ago, I was like, graduation's coming up. I do crisis management, and you're always preparing yourself for like what is going to be a moment in which we have to focus on some change in the status quo. You were right about my biography. It's a weird one for these times. I am Arab American, Lebanese Christian. My husband is Jewish. My kids are Jewish. 2 of them are college age. And definitely sympathetic with the concerns about how Israel is conducting the war and criticisms of the present administration that I'm supportive of. So there's lots of different challenges or debates in the House. But most importantly, I think professionally, I've been in this space a long time, both on the Homeland Security side and the de-escalation side. That's been my mantra for a long time. And I'm not saying anything people don't know now, which is colleges and universities were just exceptionally unprepared for how they wanted to deal with this. And I can go into that, but it's just basically you're seeing the lack of preparedness for what was already known on the calendar.
Let's dig into this kind of in pieces here. So we're going to be talking about the public safety perspective, and a lot of the objection to this has been from a public safety, public way disruption thing. So could you kind of clarify, what are the encampments doing from a public safety perspective? Because President Biden, I think just a few days ago, forcefully condemned the encampments, saying that there's a right to protest, but not to cause chaos. And my question is, how do we define chaos here? It can't just be blocking commencement.
Right, exactly. So look, the colleges and universities have an interest in, say, a safe and secure buildings, as Columbia did, and certainly safe and secure communities for all of their students, and in particular, Jewish students. So each school is going to be different. And that's sort of the benefit of me having touches nationally, is that you actually see universities look at the encampments and say, okay, it's in this area. The kids are going on. We've had encampments before. I'm not going to lose my head. That's sort of the Wesleyan model. You have others like Brown and Northeastern say, look, we need to deal with this, but we're not going to deal with it as a public safety matter, but as a free speech matter. And let's engage what the students are saying and what they want to essentially de-escalate. And then you have the third model, which is the one that we're sort of focused on, which is schools that come on strong. And I think Columbia is the best example of this, sort of went from DEFCON 5 peace to DEFCON 1 war like 2 weekends ago, where everything was okay. And then your first salvo is public safety. That's never going to work. That then launched a nationwide reaction by students. My mom, I make it simple. Kennedy School's always made fun of for its threes. We always do things in threes, but I actually think part of my job is to translate what's going on. The successful model is threefold. Is that one is you provide outlets for students. These are colleges and universities. Protest is normal. Everyone's got to stop losing their head, right? Like, I mean, that is absolutely right. So the second is off ramps. In other words, you don't go to war, sort of say, bringing the outside police in immediately. And that includes engagement. So that's what you saw with Brown, an agreement that they would, some things were not permissible, some things were permissible, and you begin to allow students ways in which they're expressing themselves, but also know that there is conduct that is not acceptable. That's basically Wesleyan essentially done that. You haven't seen Wesleyan ratchet up in any way. And I think that's really important as well, because, if there is outsiders, put the outside agitator into perspective, but if there are outsiders or horrible people who are doing or saying things that make the experience, in particular for Jewish students, unsafe, not that they feel unsafe, because that's kind of hard to define, but that is in fact unsafe, you have to deal with it immediately. And then the third O is outcomes. Then you begin to say, essentially, okay, here are the consequences. This is an illegal trespass, as it was in Columbia. We need to clear it. So part of it is the colleges and universities defining what the behavior is that is acceptable. But if you say no conduct is acceptable, that's the kind of reaction you're going to get. And it's inconsistent with all the other protests that they've allowed for everything from gay rights to the pro-gun lobby. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But obviously, given the sensitivities of this issue and the camps, people are not seeing this rationally. And part of what my job is just like, take a deep breath. This is a protest. We know how to deal with protest. And we're now starting to see some of those examples. I always say whenever I'm on air, like, I just want to put this in perspective. There's thousands of protests going on, and we're focused on 3 or 4 schools. And we know why we're focused on those 3 or 4 schools. UCLA is interesting.
I'm so glad you brought UCLA up. So I'm a California native. And so the thing that's been interesting to me, of course, in a broader sense, is not just the schools that we focus on being kind of the elite institutions when there's so many happening at state schools across the country, but the differences between the ways that both campus police and also, city or state police have dealt with this. And so contrasting, for instance, the reaction at Columbia, where police response was very forceful even before the students occupied Hamilton Hall. And then at UCLA, the opposite, where counter-protesters violently attacked a pro-Palestinian encampment and police took hours to step in. So can you walk me through what the calculations are that these different law enforcement bodies seem to be making?
Yeah, so and all of them are being guided by colleges and universities. And I don't think I've seen an incident where the police just come in without sort of a requirement. So I want to, I teach crisis management, and I often say, every crisis has preconditions. And one of these for the colleges and universities is a failure of basic safety and security precautions for both the students that are protesting and the students that may feel threatened by them. I keep saying there's something called access controls. UCLA's harder. I know UCLA, I actually grew up in the shadow of UCLA, but even access controls for the encampment would have been possible. Columbia, much easier so, and I've been surprised. I think it's hard to know how many outsiders there were, but you can certainly, I teach at Harvard. We've certainly been able to control access, and we will be able to control access at the graduations upcoming. So basically, that failure of sort of the basics, and part of that is the tensions between law enforcement and the academic freedom. So I want to talk about UCLA because it's both gotten me into trouble, follow social media, and also because it shows that this idea of the outside agitator isn't just coming from pro-Palestinians. I want to be very clear here. If people who don't like the protesters delude themselves into thinking this is just a pro-Hamas, anti-Semitic movement, they are not focused on what actually is happening. There is a grassroots effort. It's reflected in the polling. It's reflected in national polling that there is extreme criticism of the Israeli war effort in Gaza. This is not an outlier opinion. This is one in which many, at one stage, Jewish groups are going to have to acknowledge how many Jewish kids are part of the protest, which should be listened to. I don't see it as threatening. I don't see it as anti-Semitic. I don't see it as even anti-Zionist. This is a country that we are supporting, funding, giving weapons to, and it is not behaving in a manner that we should be supporting. And that's, to me, non-controversial. It is absolutely. And what the protesters are saying is our institution, whether it's because of investments or simply because we want to be heard, needs to be part of this dialogue. And I just believe that. I'm not threatened by it. And there's like sort of a proxy test now about what that means. Is it anti-Semitic? It's absolutely not anti-Semitic. And it's a flashing red light to me. The word anti-Semitism has been thrown around at basic democratic discourse, where if you look over at Israel, they're freaking out in the streets condemning the war effort. And that's not viewed as anti-Semitic.
So UCLA.
So UCLA is a good example where this idea of the outsider actually cuts both ways. Politico is at least reporting, I haven't confirmed it in CNN, I don't know if it's confirmed it, that big funders are supporting counter-protesters. In this case, the university failed. The chancellor has admitted that failure to protect the protesters. They are peaceful. They may be doing something illegal. And it's hard for people to conceive of that. You can be peaceful and do something illegal because you shouldn't be in that area or you're in a building. And it's that peacefulness that we need to concentrate on. And when it's not peaceful, that's when law enforcement comes in. Columbia is harder because, again, I was shocked when I woke up that morning, like, how did they let the building be infiltrated like this? That's just crazy. We know how to secure buildings. But that was a criminal trespass. That is private property. You cannot go in there. It was disruptive to the school. I'm not sure I would have handled the law enforcement effort as they did, but no one got hurt.
So kind of delving a little bit into the very nature of the people who are protesting, because that has been a big part of it. There's along with the charges that anti-Zionism or anti-Semitism is, again, as you've noted, to varying misleading extents, major to this protest moment. There's also plenty of scorn being leveled at the students, specifically targeting their youth and their education level. So I wonder if you could talk a little bit about kind of how coherent are these student demands from your perspective, and are they being engaged with seriously as a practical matter here?
Well, I think when a university treats them as seriously, they actually have had the most successful outcome. So I'm not sure what the benefit is of mocking students. Look, are there going to be people who don't know what they're fighting for? Are there going to be people who are just joining the crowd? Are there going to be bad seeds? Certainly. These are not 4-year-olds. And I think it is so condescending to think that a 20-year-old who is absorbing information that's different than you and I. If you even look at CNN International as compared to CNN or Al Jazeera or TikTok, they are absorbing information, accurate information of what is going on in Gaza. We're not seeing it as much as they are. If you look at their feeds, and are they absorbing bad information or maybe unreliable information? I'm sure they are. So are we, actually. So are the old people. So I get those criticisms. I just think as a whole, I'm not sure what that gets you. Like, what does mocking get you for 20 years? Look, student protest, looking back at student protests 20 years later, they've generally been right, right? You know, if you look at the anti-war protests, maybe they didn't cause the end of the war in Vietnam, but they were expressing a sentiment that it took the US government many years to realize. If you look at the civil rights movement, same. I'm not saying this is the same. I don't know how this unfolds, but the idea that this can be caricatured as outside influences taking hold of the brains of our students, well, then the colleges should be ashamed of themselves. Why the heck do you have such, feeble minds? And so I'm willing to engage that concern. I think we've seen enough quotes that suggest that there are fools in every movement, but there's nothing in what they're demanding that seems naive to me. It actually seems painfully real, right? I mean, in other words, what they're expressing, that they've gotten bigger to simply express the dissatisfaction of a generation in institutions and in the status quo, strikes me as something also we should listen to.
Kind of to that point, university is often when students are learning how to conceive of themselves as adult thinkers and political actors. So I'm curious, because the word chaos has been thrown around so much, and the concept of what is a violent protest? Is there something that involves speech that makes this inherently violent in a way that civil rights protests were not, that sort of thing? I guess my question is, from a security and safety perspective, balancing those free speech rights, is treating this style of protest or the subject matter of this protest as chaotic doing something to our standards generally of peaceful protest?
Yeah, it is. It absolutely is. I'm looking out across the United States. I'm seeing thousands of colleges and universities of which chaos does not apply. Chaos is a way it's a little bit like border invasion. It's a way to describe in a way that benefits a political side. There is chaos if you want to define chaos as protest. I don't. And we're a country in which protest has been part of our fibers. So here's how I think about it, and how protest is an outlet of free speech. It is a part of free speech. Students want to protest. They should be allowed to. Colleges and universities seem to have not had this problem before. There are protests that are unlawful to the extent that a school will choose for them to be unlawful. In other words, a lot of these are private schools. They can kick anyone out they want. It behooves them to be consistent. So yeah, maybe putting up structures or putting up tents or whatever is unlawful in the sense that arguably it's an unlawful trespass, but it's not violent or chaotic. And I've been on these guys just once at MIT yesterday. I mean, it's like, yeah, there's a bunch of tents okay. The school can decide that it doesn't want it, but it should decide in a way that is transparent, that provides, as I said, off ramps, and that is clear about the outcomes for the students. And the students want to graduate, they want their tuition. I mean, it's not like the schools are defensive against these students. So I'm very careful about what language I use. Now, the violent part is trickier. So, and that is where I want all commentators to be careful, and all leaders to be careful. I am, for those who follow, like, the fact that I'm viewed as radical is like the most hilarious thing, because my kids view me as a complete sellout. But like, the throwing of the word anti-Semitic, the defining of the movement as pro-Hamas is radicalizing. And it's not radicalizing towards the protesters, it's radicalizing towards those who disagree with them. It is a way to define them as an outsider and as a threat, when in fact there are kids. Like, and I've been very vocal, in particular against Jewish leaders who are just shamelessly promoting that narrative out there, which then elevates the opportunity for colleges and universities to figure out a way out of this. So the definition of what is uncomfortable, what is challenging to a student, in particular to a Jewish student, as compared to what is harassing or unsafe, is not a definitive line. But the anecdote of a single student doesn't prove that. That a single student says, I don't like walking in the yard because there's protesters, does not per se make the protesters anti-Semitic or the school condoning anti-Semitism. We all know that. This is like the most truthful thing I've ever said, just no one's willing to admit it, right? So where is that line then to unsafe? It would be, right, how you would define it, that a group of people based on their religion are unable to exert the very rights and privileges that are afforded to all other students. They're not allowed to go to class. They are harassed. They are isolated. They are heckled. That, to me, is different than, I don't like the protesters. Protesters aren't there to be liked. And one of the things that the anecdotal evidence, which I hear a lot, is different than the unsafe evidence, which I also see. And schools should be quick to stop that. But we've just so muted this word of what it means to be safe. And the irony is, of course, that those promoting the end of speech because a group of students feel unsafe are the very people who mocked that same attitude when it was stated by the trans community, the LGBTQ community, women, African Americans, and immigrants. Irony is a nice way of putting it. It's hypocrisy. It just is.
I do want to end by looking at the way, we are not just talking about elite universities, but we are in Massachusetts, so we should touch on the way that a few of them have handled this. We've talked about MIT briefly. The thing that is interesting to me about Harvard's approach is, as you've noted, Harvard Yard, where the encampment is essentially kind of caged off at this point. So no one without an ID can enter the yard where the encampment is. So how does that decision sit with you from a dual security perspective, but then also the broader political speech perspective, that it's also kind of inherently limiting contact?
Right, exactly. And it is a challenge. So I don't know the strategy right now for Harvard. I help the people that ask for my help. But basically, if I were Harvard, hello, Harvard, you have a date. That date is your graduation. What is your TikTok backwards from that date, right? So is it that the yard is completely locked up until then? Okay, that's only 2 weeks from this Thursday, I think, this coming Thursday. So that date then becomes a way to then move back and determine what is going to be the various off-ramps to end this. So the encampment has moved from one area that would have been annoying but not a nuisance to the graduation. I understand now it is now in an area that would impact, and this is my standard, the sight and hearing lines for the graduation. That to me it's objective. I don't care what the students are saying. I don't care what the university is saying. That is an objective criteria, right? With those steps where the students are now, this is Widener Library. I know this is into the details of the geography of Harvard, but I've been there a long time. That is where everyone comes down to graduate. That is an interruption of the legitimate proceedings that are going on. So to me, this will have to end with the ending of that encampment. And that strikes me as not controversial because I have an objective rule. These students now will undermine the sight and hearing lines for a graduation that should benefit all the students. So how they do that is a combination, as I said, of outlets, off-ramps, and outcomes. You have 2.5 weeks to figure that out, but we've seen schools do it. And then police should be a last resort. So MIT, for example, when I was there, it's like not pretty, but it's not. I mean, I wish people could see these things. I mean, it's just like a bunch of tens. It's like not attractive. I can understand that. And they're just allowed to go on. So that would be the combination of things that I do. I understand the lockdown right now of the yard, just given the intense scrutiny of Harvard and the dramas that we went through in the fall. But that's not sustainable after graduation. It's just not.
So the Tufts encampment is expanding even as commencement draws near. Officials say they'll negotiate with students there. Harvard students are being pulled before the administration. I know you're in the analysis, but not the prognostication business. But where does this go from here?
This is not over. I mean, my God, if Israel goes into Rafah, right now we're talking on Sunday, May 5th. We don't know if there's a deal. It is possible that the fall, this will reemerge, especially with the political campaign going on. So one of the things that colleges and universities have to think about is sort of what will be a new standard setting for this summer, so that when students do re-arrive, I don't know what the atmosphere is going to look like, that they are better ready, not just operationally, but communications wise, for a constituency that's complicated. I mean, I heard someone say, well, university presidents, they're just like kings or queens. I was like, really? They're not. They have a variety of constituencies from, in Harvard's case, of course, a corporation and outside donors, but they also have faculty, they have students, they have parents, they have deans who may not align with their overall assessment. They've got to do this better, so that, again, you're not going from DEFCON 5 to DEFCON 1 in 12 hours.
Thanks again to Juliette Kayyem for joining me on the Codcast. Thank you for listening. I'm Jennifer Smith. Our producer is John Gee. Leave a rating and review wherever you're hearing us now if you want to help other folks find this, and email codcast@commonwealthbeacon.org if you ever want to get in touch directly. We'll be back next week.